I just thought really today I just wanted to spend a little time talking about some of the pros and cons of on-farm versus strip trial research, and some of the fertility work that we're doing in Ohio, and kind of our approach, and just see if you all have questions for me. So, on station, on farm, right? This is a session that's dedicated to kind of on farm and how we do it, and a lot of tips and a lot of good information has been presented so far. So if we think about just contrasting these two approaches, historically, do we got a? Well, you can't see it, but historically, the on station has been kind of what's dominated land grant ag research over many, many decades, right? And so typically on station performed on these university farms, many treatments, we can have many treatments, replicated all this stuff, usually involves small plots. We try to minimize field variability and save space, so we push this to small plots. On farm, however, of course we're doing this in private farms, usually just a few treatments. We don't want the on-farm experiment that's doomed for failure is one that has many treatments and is complicated because things inevitably get screwed up. So we need to think about simple questions and, maybe just a handful of treatments. And of course, because we're scaling, we don't have, fancy small little 2-row combines. We've got more larger field scale equipment, so typically the area of those plots or those test strips is going to be bigger, right? So if we just spend a minute or two thinking about what's good about on-station research and maybe what's bad about it. So I would say that because trust us, we're trained professionals, there's a lot more consistency and control and management. We often have very fancy toys, so we can specialize things, get really well-calibrated rates or planting populations or fertility rates, etc. And then this is an important one, small plots. When we're only dealing with plots that are in the 100 or 1,000 square foot range instead of the 10,000 or 100,000 square foot range, we have a lot less soil variability that we have to deal with. And then, of course, because they're small, we can have many, many treatments. So the disadvantage is that here in Ohio, it's certainly true for agronomic research, there's really only three, well, I shouldn't say this, but there's three main stations, field stations, that Ohio State runs. And so if we want to have a trial, we've got essentially 3 trials per year. And then we might need to do that many, many years if we want a lot of data, right? If we want robust information. So limited amount of sites equals some kind of limitation in how much data we can collect over time. And then, of course, anything inherent when you don't have the diversity of soils or a good representation. There's only 3 farms in Ohio. Really only 3 or 4 or 5 soil types that are represented, okay? And then a lot of the criticism of small plot research is that there's a lot of edge effect, a lot of borders, and is that really realistic in terms of a field-based scenario? Okay, so we compare that to on-farm advantages. Of course, a lot we can scale. It's very scalable, so we can scale this up. Have many, many different farms and a diversity of management practices and soil types. We can gain a lot of information quickly. This is, a point that needs to be underscored. It doesn't belong at the bottom of this table, but it's this idea of the interaction with farmers. And as researchers, we think we know what's important and what we've got some idea of. This is what we need. This is what the farmer needs. They need this bit of information to make the step forward or whatever. But the reality is that there's a lot of learning that happens in terms of when you have those interactions with farmers and you sit down and talk to them about, what are they primarily concerned about or what their constraints are, et cetera, et cetera. So this kind of iterative interaction that happens in the formation of these research trials. Okay, so of course disadvantages is that There's lots of folks out there. It's the real world. Time is money. Sometimes things get screwed up. Sometimes there's errors in trials, and we don't know about them, and we won't really know about them. We don't have that quality control that we might at a university farm. Equipment limitations, and then again, if we have a very complex design, it's typically not a good idea to do that on farm without intervention. Okay, so here's my very small attempt. How many farmers do we have in the audience? Okay, how many people? Raise your hand as a farmer if you would prefer. If you had a choice of seeing data that was large strip trials versus small plot, who would rather see large strip trials for that data to be more believable to you? Okay, that's the common response, right? So this is some fancy statistics to show you why little data dorks like me like small plots, right? So this is data from Michigan. And it's looking at different scaled size fields, from 5 to 10 acres to 2.5 acres to 0.05 acres, 2,000 square feet. Okay, so from kind of a field-based scenario down to what would be considered small plot. And then these are the standard errors of yield, of grain yield in these crops. Okay, so standard errors are really just that variability around the mean. Okay. And if we look down here, what we can see is that the bigger, this is an absolute scale, so that bigger that number, that means there's more variability around that yield. So with large plots, we have 0.73, and we go down 0.22, and then 0.18. And so the idea here, of course, is that when we have plots that shrink, our variability shrinks too. Why is that important? We've talked about variability. Josh McGrath talked about as your N rate increases, your variability might decrease. We've talked about it. So why do we care about variability? So if we have a 13 bushel difference between a fertilized plot is 13 bushel higher versus an unfertilized plot, but those two treatments are not statistically significant. Why is that? Why do you think that is? Because there's too much variability to show the statistics. So when we have a lot of variability, it means our statistical power goes down the drain, right? And so that's why we like small plot research for this reason, because we can make statements like, that treatment has an effect, or that treatment doesn't have an effect. So variability, uncontrolled variability, is kind of the bane of a field researcher, right? So, any questions on this? Is this clear? We shrink plots. It makes sense, right? We shrink plot size. We shrink all the variability that we see in terms of soil type and edge effects, weed populations, disease, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So, why farmers don't like small plots? Well, there might be a limited number of farms, and so maybe one's not really that close to you. Maybe it's 4 counties over. Maybe it's in a different soil type. Small plots are not large fields, right? So when you all are farming, of course, a whole field is not represented in 2,000 square feet. So why else don't farmers like small plot research? What are some other criticisms? What's that? Time consuming? Okay. Anybody else? Management. What about management? What's that? Right. Using equipment. So, it's this idea that they might not have equipment to scale to that size, right? So sometimes it's a matter of not wanting to do smaller plots, and sometimes it's a matter of not really trusting or not preferring small plot research. So, okay, so that's just like a little bit of back and forth. There's not a right answer here, or a correct answer. It's not that strip trials are superior and small plots are inferior, or vice versa. It's just that there's pluses and minuses with both. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit now about some of the fertilizer trials that we're running in the state. Tri-state recommendations. Who's actually looked at this document? Has anyone downloaded this PDF and read it like the Bible at night for your bedtime prayers? Anyone here? Okay. What's that? No. We should set up a blocker on his any Kentucky IP address is not allowed to download this document. Believe it or not, it is a bona fide PDF. It's published in '95. We're over 20 years old now. Suffice it to say that it's been kind of a founding or cornerstone in terms of how we think about managing fertility in the state. It's a joint effort, of course, between Michigan State, Purdue, and Ohio. But the problem is that a lot's changed in 20 years if we think about farming and how we farm now versus how we farmed 20 years ago or 30 or 40 years ago, that the data that went into this document. A big thing for me is that the majority of farmland is in the state, and all three states actually, is rented ground. And so the fundamental philosophy of soil management here is this build and maintain, where there's a lot of folks that aren't in that same time scale, right? So they're wanting maybe just to they're in a short-term contract and they don't want to invest in terms of building up the soil. So I think we need to think about nutrient management not just from a build and maintain perspective, but maybe from other, maybe shorter-term, economically driven perspectives as well. And nobody needs me to tell you about water quality issues in the state and why this is putting a spotlight on a lot of the things that we're doing. So tri-states as they stand now is this document. Nitrogen recommendations are based on yield goals. That was revised maybe 10 years ago for this maximum return to nitrogen model for corn. This is a economic model. Okay, I'm not going to get into that. But again, this for P and K, this idea of build and maintain, where your fertilizer rate increases as your soil test level is low. As your soil test level increases, you hit this maintenance range, and then, of course, as that extractable nutrient increases in the soil test, then you don't need to apply or apply less and less, right? So that's the kind of the entire framework in terms of how the recommendations are based. So suffice it to say that I've been in my position for about 3 years now, and so when I first got here, we started the process of revising recommendations. This is checkoff dollars at work. Majority of our trials are on farm, and we're really trying to get a diversity of sites and managements. Okay, so this is not. I wish I could say I had the good foresight and wisdom to think through this, but I'll credit the Corn Board, Ohio Corn Board, for really pushing this idea in terms of thinking about public-private partnerships and having private crop consultants and agronomists help conduct some of these trials, right? Because it's not just about the process of generating a recommendation, right? We can generate all the recommendations we want, but what we really want are the people that are out there actually telling a grower what to apply. We want them to buy into this and understand the process, and if they're running trials for us, we're going to have a lot better chance of success if they can see what we're doing, right? Okay, so kind of old model versus new model. How things were done before, the old tri-states versus new. We went back and looked at the data that went into the tri-state recommendations. We scrubbed these annual fertilizer reports that were put out by my predecessor's predecessor, Jay Johnson. And we found that for P and K that went into the tri-state recs, there was only 9 sites in the state that went into those phosphorus and potassium trials, okay? And you probably can't see numbers, but Clark County right here, the western branch, 98 trials. The next one is the Worcester site in Wayne County, and then Northwest Branch in Wood County. Those 3 sites alone represent like 85% of the total trials that were run. Okay, so very like 25, 30 years of data at predominantly 3 sites. Okay. For nitrogen, we had a little bit better representation, 15 total sites. But again, a lot of the same sites that were repeated over and over again. And this is a very different approach, okay? And so this is a map showing the red dots and the orange dots show where we have conducted in the last 3 years fertilizer trials essentially in the state, okay? And so you can see the distribution here. Or I said the red and orange. It's actually the red and blue dots. So this is just 3 years of data. And there's a lot better representation in terms of the soils and it's not perfect, mind you, right? We have some work to do in southwestern Ohio, but we're trying to get there. So, all right. So, and then I just think, you know, I'll take a moment and think about this a little bit further and think about the new model moving forward. And this is maybe a bit of a philosophical point to make, but you know, from my perspective as a fertility specialist, there will always be, no matter what we do, no matter how fancy our yield monitors or UAVs or whatever, there's always going to be a fairly large degree of uncertainty in my lifetime, I'll say, in terms of fertility recommendations, right? That is, I have a fairly cynical worldview about this, is that I don't think with all the soil types and the managements and the weather interactions, you multiply all 3 of those together and you got a lot of possible scenarios. And there's just going to be, you know, this is the nature of fertility research. People that do it understand that there's just SHI something that doesn't make sense, where you've got sites that should be responsive that aren't, sites that aren't responsive or that shouldn't be responsive but are. I mean, that's just how things work, right? So what we want to do is move away from very kind of prescriptive recommendations, like trust me, I'm the expert. I'm going to tell you exactly what to apply, and this is going to be to the pound basis. We want to, I think, give farmers a little bit more flexibility in terms of what they want to do, and see kind of where that leads us. Okay, I think that I'm a huge fan. I think, like everyone in the room, in terms of there's not many good reasons why you should, if you've got the capacity, that it's relatively easy to conduct on-farm research yourself. Well, I shouldn't say that easy, but there's a lot of things that we can do to kind of ask questions, okay? So for me, this idea, as Extension's role kind of continues to transform and public funds continue to become less and less, we need to think about the role of how we as Extension agents partner with the private sector in terms of generating good information and getting our message out, right? And there's a lot of really good committed people in the private sector that are willing to partner with us to do that. And then just this idea, you know, we've talked a lot about this in the session already, but it's never been easier to conduct fertilizer trials, so what are you waiting for, right? So, okay, so our approach is essentially a pre-fertilization soil sampling. We typically do an early reproductive tissue test for nutrient concentration, and then we, of course, are going to measure the grain, the yield, and then also the nutrient concentration. Okay. So, in other words, the same information, soil sampling, say yearly for R1 for corn, and then we take grain and nutrient analysis. There are some details we don't need to go into, but there's really 2 kind of fundamental approaches or trial types that we're talking about. For nitrogen, we're doing a multiple rate. So we want to look at that response curve. In other words, what's our nitrogen rate versus our grain yield, and find that optimal rate. That's feeding into the MRTN model for corn that's up there. We're going to be developing a MRTN model for wheat. because that's still, as it stands right now, a little bit ugly and yield-based. For phosphorus, potassium, and sulfur in corn, soybeans, and wheat, it's really just a single rate. It's a plus or minus. So unfertilized versus fertilized, that's what we're doing. And the ultimate goal of that is to relate soil test level to a tissue test level to relative yield. And so, in other words, and this is, again, this is data that went into the original tri-state recommendations from Ohio, but it's this idea of relative yield that is defined as the unfertilized divided by the fertilized, so times 100. So if it's less than, if it's 1-to-1, if there's no difference, your relative yield's 100%. If it's 70, it means you took a 30% hit. And then we just identify that critical level. That's, this is how this was done for the original tri-states, and we're hoping to continue this approach moving forward. Questions? All right, so 2014 and 15, we started in soybeans the first year, then we moved to corn. Here's our nutrient N, P, and K, and then total sites. And then 2016, our field season really kind of exploded, which was great to see. So we had 92 trials last year. That brings our total right now to up to 151, and then we have essentially one more year. This is our kind of our last year that we've got dedicated funds to continue this, okay? So in 2017, this next coming field season, our really top priority is to get some more P and K in any crop, really, because we just really want to get P and K right. We want to have a good, robust data set. We know that nitrogen is a squirrely animal, and we're really not going to get that completely nailed down. We are doing sulfur work, and we'd like to get a lot more sulfur trials in the mix this year. And of course, starter P and corn remains kind of a perennial favorite. So I think that's an important point to basically ask: can we reduce our broadcast P application with a starter application? Okay, so it's kind of unclear at the moment if this is going to really continue as a true tri-state recommendation document, or is it just going to be Ohio-based. It would be great if we could continue it as a tri-state recommendation. We hope to have this more of a living document, that we feed data into it on a yearly basis and not do, publish a giant PDF, have it sit there for 20 years before anyone revisits again. That's not the idea, I don't think. And then really our time frame is sometime next year, probably mid-year, something that we'd have some of those recommendations out. I want to talk just a little bit, a plug, in terms of some of John and Kaylee's work for how we're trying to build capacity in terms of on-farm research, and just a couple of different examples at the university. So this was the first talk of the session, and they spent a lot of time developing this, and it's a really nice tool. So this is the OSU Plots app. Again, I'm not going to talk too much about it because it's already been discussed today. So a tool really designed for conducting, facilitating, tracking on-farm research, right? And then the second thing is this another program, which is these acre internships that we've started, where we've taken undergrads from OSU and from Wilmington, other places, and placing them in the summer. It's a summer intensive internship, placing them in different counties across the state to work with that county educator to help conduct on-farm trials. So this is not just fertility. They do all kinds of stuff. They do disease and insect stuff and what have you. But the idea is to try to build capacity within the state, so we can facilitate more on-farm research. It's just a tool for that county agent who has those relationships with those growers or what have you, to kind of do more research. And so last year we had 8 interns, and then here's kind of our, our documented impact, where we had 15 projects supported, 66 on-farm trials in 20 counties, over 32,000 acres scouted. So it's a really good experience for the undergraduate and trying to really kind of build our capacity to do on-farm research, right? Okay, so my plug, we are looking for folks if you're interested in helping do a trial. We have some members here that have done that in the past and continue to do so in terms of run a trial. This is your link that will get you there. You can email me or what have you. There's payments if you're a crop consultant. You have clients that would be interested in this. We pay both farmers and facilitating crop consultants. So there are money to do that to help pay you for your time and your energy.
guess can I talk prices? I mean, I'm not a vendor for it, but for EV, I think we paid $25,000 for the plane. Camera was, thermal was 12. The Sequoia camera runs about 5. The long range ag camera by EV now is down to 10. There's other vendors out there. I'm sorry, I don't know, but it's down to 10 long range. You're gonna have about what, 30,000, something like that.
So the fixed wing, regardless if it's EV or something, you'll be probably 15 to 30 into the bird itself relative, and that gets you all the navigation, that gets all the flight planning. And we talked about the flight planning, you get all that, but then you got to buy the cameras. And so you can be in as low as $1,200 for some decent visible, but you can be up to 15 for a thermal camera pretty easy as well. But then the back end, everyone handles the back end stitching differently. Fixed 4D is not too bad, but some companies will charge for per acre fee for you to stitch that together. So I was looking at, can I buy the software, or do I have to use an online processor that charges me on a per acre basis?
Yeah, it's coming down the price too.
Coming on, but it's still expensive.
Yeah, they just said that's one thing that's stopped and they're taking off for quite more. They're looking at it all until the price starts coming down. That will be so long.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Trey. Let's give it time. Thank you very much. Good conversation as well. So, unless someone stands up, I don't have the last speaker has not shown. I don't see anyone rushing up here, so I'm going to take that we'll adjourn for the day. So again, we appreciate you being here, and appreciate all our speakers. So thanks for coming. I know some people walked in, just again, make an announcement that our last speaker did not show up today, so FYI. Time to go home. You want just him, right? You want to run it, right? So my comment is, I'll be here. Just
So okay, you got your license, your regular license, and then what's an online test, or did you have to take some?
I hope before I retire,
Online test.
but I always told my as long as you're
That's different. Right, but if I want to hear that,
You know, I don't want to say it's guarantee. You got to work with
is that whole thing a way to get more items out? Because they lost many. Because even if you're not doing a third class medical, still go to the same job. You go like 2 years ago, I had third class. Because I was thinking about getting case.
I think so.
I thought they were So you won't have to do all of that, but this guy basically, there's a regular doctor. As long as I have a driver's license. And you never know. Then you're good. Oh, you don't say.
basically it's the same check. The same check that's medical examiners. Yeah. You don't submit it to them. Start take an online course for 2 years.
Which is basically you're giving your own health assessment. Right now. You have to be honest about that. I am taking steps to get out. Okay.
That's the one that's gonna be. Oh, that's.
Excuse me.
The guy that just stopped.
I don't know.
Oh, you want to say so?
It's got they're both 35. This is 65.
You can use this all of 60, half the 60. Why not pure digital infrared technology?
But that's not like.
You can fly twice, right? You can fly infrared past and then visible past. You can't do both of them.
It's light sport.
Are you down in this room tomorrow?
That's the
This is
No, it's the on-farm research doesn't work one.
Oh, okay.
this
Curtis and Bruce put together. Yes, for some reason.
So the thing is, it's got 4 bands. It's collecting all the
It's down all the way past.
I got both of these back together right before I have
Individual topics.
Yeah.
Assigned to a room.
More than you wanted to know about this. So.
There's a lot of overlap.
But if you
Yeah,
have to
that's
play
true.
around with this,
Yeah.
it's really
take the tires off.
Okay. Well, and that's fine.
I have this here.
I don't want to just, that sounds like, well, that goes to, and then the time is going, this is sort of an issue.
Yeah, that's the only reason why I was doing the same topic.
typically an April 19th on the air's cap.
The title's posted. Right. Okay. Well, I gotta get this stuff.
Oh, I see.
Sometimes it does.
There's 1, 2 available. This is our
But that's drones. Right, the drone. A lot of acres being formed on zoom in there.
Yeah, I'm getting, I just wanted to have the tack on the wall.
Over 10 years ago. You get maybe a fly or two. Maybe 15 today. The fans see more of it as
Once you get it, you can run
It's kind of becoming a no-brainer after 2.5 or 4.
but it's. Oh, did you? I tried to, but I took 6
Hey, you might have to play it backwards.
Is there a significant message in there or something?
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, well, I can do it myself. So I usually
Profit in his own hometown.
I know. Probably. Yeah,
Got a camera,
there's some.
got a recorder, next to the board, got a recorder on the podium.
most of them are like, well, we have health history. Well, we'll try and email it to you. Well, this is that part. Let me tell you, it's not box, it's a box. Tell you how to